We have 6 papers. We have 15 minutes per paper. And I'm the chair for this session. My name is Barbara Crostini. I am speaking to you from Sweden. I'm speaking from my home. I have 2 dogs and some chickens, so you might hear some background noise, but I hope not too much. I'm really happy to be here. I'm a Byzantinist mainly, but I have an interest in gems because of this peculiar fact that the earliest crucifixions are found in gems, and I wanted to teach myself more. So it's great that Ergon organized this gem jamboree, as we can call it. There's so much in it, and I am really excited to meet the speakers for today. So just to say, I will introduce the speakers really quickly and read their name and affiliation and title and say one thing about them. Then at the end of each speaker, if I find a question already in the chat, we can ask one question per speaker very briefly. So if you have an urgent question, please write it in the chat. And otherwise, we can take more comments at the end of the session. Hopefully, we'll all get to that. So our first speaker is Matthias Recke. He is at the Goethe-Universität in Frankfurt in Germany. And his main interest is Cyprus. And he's worked on the Sanctuary of Apollo there, which is an exciting find and place. His title today is Private Heroes, Iconographic Studies on Gems and Stamp Seals from Archaic and Classical Cyprus, with a special focus on the warrior image, its use and transformation. Please, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to open today's section of this so successful Congress. And after the brilliant start yesterday, I can not only thank the organizers, but already congratulate them warmly. My contribution on the archaic and classical gems and stamp seals of Cyprus follows a purely iconographic approach. The material has mostly been found in Cyprus. The fact that the place of discovery is not necessarily the place of manufacture need not bother us if we assume that the images of the gems had a meaning to the owners. The position of Cyprus in the Eastern Mediterranean is of course known to you very well, but it's nice to realize once again how close the Phoenician coast is in the west, how close Pamphylia and Cilicia are in the north, and even Egypt in the south is considerably closer than the Greek mainland or the Aegean with the Greek island and the cities of the Ionian west coast. You compare this distance. Despite the geographical proximity to neighboring cultures, and the term crossroads of civilization is always used in this context, a cultural proximity to Greece can already be grasped from the late Bronze Age onwards. In the Iron Age, when Cyprus was organized into different kingdoms, most of them spoke and wrote Greek, even if they did not use the Greek alphabet, but their own syllabic script. As an example of the strictly hierarchical social structure, I show you here a random selection of grave finds from the royal tombs of Salamis. The deposition of horse-drawn chariots in the dromos of a large tomb clearly goes back to Homeric practices. Armor and iron weapons mark the military pretensions of the ruling elite. While the grave goods clearly represents the values of the ruling class, corresponding motifs appear only rarely in archaic glyptic. As an example, I show you here a selection of gems that represent practically the entire motivic repertoire of warrior representations. In the top row, you see scarabs depicting warriors. They are mainly characterized by the large round shield, lance, and helmet-like headgear. The second row shows representations of horsemen. The warlike context is indicated by the pointed helmet. The bottom row shows two-wheeled chariots with spoked wheels, always with several people. All of them are wearing the pointed helmet. What these depictions have in common is that action is shown to a certain extent. What is missing, however, are military actions, fighting, and combat. Here you can see the only two examples that could possibly be related to this. While in the upper example, it's unclear whether the warrior is taking action against the horseman with the sword, the combat situation on the lower example is clear, and the outcome of the fight is also clearly indicated. Let us return to the three main motifs. The warriors are all characterized by a pronounced chin, possibly intended to represent a beard, a large nose, and a pointed helmet. Detailed indications of weapons are missing, and the body as such is completely neglected. As you can see from the small terracotta head on the right, the design corresponds to the examples we know from small-scale terracotta sculptures of archaic times in Cyprus. In fact, the repertoire, at least in the sanctuaries of male deities, is limited to these three types. In the selected examples, you will again recognize the standing warriors, the horsemen, and the chariots. In agreement with the gems, the complete neglect of the body, reduced to a cylinder, is also noticeable here. Legs and feet are missing, only the action is given some attention. Unlike the rather rare gems, such terracotta figures were produced by the thousands and consecrated in masses in the sanctuaries of archaic times. As an example, I show you the sanctuary of Aia Irini and part of the finds in the Museum of Stockholm. Here you will notice that the warrior figures are mainly concentrated on the small size objects. The larger the terracottas become, the less warlike they are depicted. And the life-size figures in the last row, which you see here, carry neither weapons nor a helmet. If we therefore assume that the size of a votive figure is proportional to its value, it is striking that the outstanding individual pieces choose precisely not the warrior image, but the motive of the calmly standing adoration. The turban-like headdress of the large figure has been interpreted as a sign of rank or dignity. If this is correct, social distinction does not take place through the pictorial use of the weapons and armor, as is the case in the royal tombs at Salamis and other sites. With the end of the archaic period, warrior representations practically disappear completely from the repertoire of the sanctuaries. The type of the votary dressed in a long robe who can carry offerings in his hands now predominates. As you can see from this historical photo, physical training continues to play no role in the representations, but it is noticeable that the majority of the statues are now youthful and unbearded. Let us return to the gems. With the early 5th century, a series of gems appear in Cyprus that are rather unique iconographically. You see here two very similar pieces attributed to the seaman master and his circle. The motive of these two gems is difficult to understand. A youth, naked except for a helmet, is depicted in a strange pose. The body is distinctly muscular. Legs, arms, as well as chest and abdominal muscles are clearly defined. On his left arm, he carries a large Boeotian shield, possibly indicating a mythological context. In his right hand, he holds a large sword, a macheira, but not raised to strike. Is it a fallen, dying warrior who is depicted here? A very similar piece of unknown find spot, now preserved in London, differs in details such as, next picture, second. So the differences are in the shape of the helmet and the type of sword from the two gems that we just saw. But the general posture of the youthful warrior is identical. So we must assume that the orientation given here by the Sphinx is correct. And we cannot turn the other ones for 90 degrees to understand it like a dance with weapons or something like that. The seaman master is considered to be an East Greek artist. Marie-Louise Vollenweider assumed that he came from Samos. However, almost 3/4 of the pieces attributed to him and his circle have been found in Cyprus. There is not the place to examine this consideration in detail, but a Cypriot origin should also be thoroughly discussed. Especially with the example with the Sphinx, I refer to the very close similarities in style to the Cypriot coins of Idalion, while the Eastern Greek sphinxes, for which I show an example from the complex of Didyma, have a completely different body as well as a different design of hairstyle and wings shape. Let us return to the work of the seaman master and look at his magnificent gem, which was found in Cyprus and is now in Boston. It depicts the struggle of a youthful warrior against an Amazon, and the interpretation as Achilles and Penthesilea is clear. This gem is very similar to an attic vase in New York Metropolitan Museum with the same theme. Beasley, who has discussed the gem in detail, describes the motif here in the back of the muscular and, with the exception of a small cloak, naked Achilles as a star, and denies a contextual reference to the depiction. In my opinion, however, it's not a star, for its design is striking asymmetrical. In fact, it's a cyprosyllabic character. A small selection of examples should show you that the design is absolutely typical. Unfortunately, it's only a single syllable and thus not particularly expressive. However, it's not the only gem in the group. On the gem on the left, depicting a naked warrior bending under his shield and up a Corinthian helmet, formerly in the De Clark collection, the name Akestos is written in syllabic script. There is also a cyprosyllabic inscription on the gem already seen with a fallen warrior, but the meaning is unclear. So Akestos is a name, this name or this expression we don't understand yet. And for the Boston gem, we have just the syllable E. Due to time constraints, we will only take a cursory look at the next two gems. The depiction of an archer with a dog from Larnaca, now in London, and a gem in Nicosia depicting a seated youth working on a helmet. Although this is not of a warrior, but rather of a craftsman, the fact that he is depicted naked and with a distinctly muscular body is remarkable for Cyprus and general interest in producing weapons as it is. If we look at this group of late archaic, early classical gems as a unit, we see that great importance is attached here to the representation of the male body. The warriors are all distinctly muscular, which is further emphasized by the play of different postures and by foreshortening in perspective. While the youthfulness finds parallels in contemporary large-scale sculpture, as we have seen, the nudity in their characterization as warrior is without any parallel in contemporary Cypriot art. During this same period, some few gems with images of athletes appear in Cyprus. This pictorial theme also has no counterparts in previous or contemporary art in Cyprus. Clearly, the tendency is reflected here that we can grasp, for example, in Greek vase painting, exemplified by two vases by Archimedes in Munich. The eagerness to experiment, to show as many different poses of the body as possible in deliberate perspectives, testifies to an artistic self-confidence that consciously breaks the boundaries of conventions imposed in the design of sacred votives. Significantly, the closest parallels for the Cypriot gems are actually to be found in Attic art and not in Eastern Greek art.
Hey.
Surprisingly, the comparisons show that the chosen pictorial formulas of the gems by no means correspondent to themes of great art in Cyprus. Although warrior representations, especially in small format terracotta statuettes from the archaic sanctuaries, are known in large numbers, the warrior image plays virtually no role in the iconography of Cypriot art in the 6th and 5th century BC. Unlike in Greece or the Near East, it does not embody central values of contemporary society, does not serve the self-representation of an upper class in public. Values such as strength and fearless superiority are used here for social distinction. The divergent representations of Cypriot gems, on the other hand, show a clear influence of contemporary Greek iconography, whose pictorial formulas, however, are very individually adapted. Although it's not clear whether these pieces were made by Greek craftsmen on Cyprus or came as an import, they do show that there was a certain need for such images in a more private setting, which, unlike sanctuaries or necropolises, is less visible to the outside world. However, there are no equivalents to gem images in vase painting either. Many years passes in Cyprus before the warrior image entered the public sphere of self-representation. The first representations of warriors in funerary art do not appear before the 4th century. To what extent these two images are successful embodiments of male strength and bravery remains to be seen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matthias, for a wonderful presentation, really beautiful objects that you presented and the amazing finds with all those statuettes. And I was wondering, are the biggest ones somehow priestly figures, or is that something that people have contemplated?
Well, they are considered as being priests or a combination of kings and priests, because we think that the kings have also the power of the priestesses.
Yeah, we have one question about artists' names. I think you mentioned one workshop that may be considered as Cypriot, but is not clear. Do you have any other information about that?
No, even that name is not the name of the artist. It's written on a gem stone found in Troas, and it's probably the name of the owner of the gem, and it's a name given by scientists to indicate this workshop.
We can return to your bigger questions in the discussion. Thank you very much again. So Elisabetta Gagetti has written extensively about gems, and she organized a conference in Aquileia in 2008 called Il Fulgore delle Gemme, and this is what I will present her as. And today she's speaking to the title, Not Only Terracottas, Freaks in Roman Glyptics. Please, Elisabetta, thank you very much.
Good morning to all of you. To start, I have a surprise. You see, in fact, two names. The very specificity of this topic required the joint competencies both of the archaeologist and of the physician. My co-author is Giuseppe Piumello, professor of pediatric endocrinology, Università San Raffaele, Milan, and after this experience, in the next future, professor of archaeology as well. In the frame of Hellenistic choroplastic art, Smyrna deserves a special place. Its workshops, known from some 30 molds found on the slopes of Mount Pagos, became active in the early 3rd century BCE and continued production until 178 CE, when an earthquake and consequent fire destroyed the urban center. The precise dating of Smyrnian statuettes within the span of 5 centuries is quite difficult. Most of the objects were brought to light by chance or after dedicated searching in the 1890s. Stratigraphy and associated materials went unrecorded. The figures were found on Mount Pagos, on the Degli Tepe, and on the Tepedik, which means that they had varied functions. They come from sanctuaries, votives, from residential quarters, decoration and or domestic cult, and from the main necropolis of the city. Grotesques are characteristic in the whole corpus from Smyrna. They can be divided into 3 main types: actors, ethnic types and caricatures, and depictions of known pathological conditions. Interest in the pathological figurines arose very early. From 1896 onwards, the engineer Paul Gaudin presented the Louvre with several hundred terracottas from Smyrna. The French physician Félix Regnault, practicing at the Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris, was able, thanks to his friendship, to keep for a while the most interesting pieces, and in 1900 published the article Le Tauric Chersonesus de Smyrne. He pointed out that some statuettes received the epithet grotesque, which they didn't deserve because they are pathological. Until now, we only had a few ancient terracottas depicting diseases, but the choroplastic school from Smyrna alone provides us with specimens in great numbers and more varied, enough to illustrate the treaty of Hippocrates. Then he lists 5 main groups of pathological statuettes, labeled as hunchbacks, facial deformities, skulls, idiots, genital organs, sometimes accompanied by sketches. From the methodological point of view, I wish to borrow once more Regnault's words. In most of these pathological statuettes, abnormalities are reproduced with enough fidelity to be able to recognize them. Undoubtedly, medical criticism in matters of art cannot claim the accuracy of a clinical examination, but often the sight of an exactly reproduced deformation alone provides enough significant detail to provide certainty. In fact, even if other workshops in Asia Minor and Alexandria produce similar figurines, terracotta statuettes representing misshapen and human figures seem to have been particularly successful in Smyrna, where choroplasts depicted realistically and with great care the clinical affliction of different parts of the human body. The reasons for such a specialization can be varied. For instance, a commercial desire to differentiate the local creations from the products of other cities in Ionia, or even the presence in the city of a renowned medical school. We must add 2 caveats about what scholars have termed iconodiagnosis or retrospective diagnosis. There are a number of iconographic conventions that may limit the realism of the depictions. The rendering of a pathology may be too stylized or too crude, or it may mix imaginary anomalies. And for jumps in particular. In the case of all the cameos where it didn't have a safe diagnosis is limited by the lack of the body, which prevents the evaluation of other symptoms besides those detectable on the head. And I show here a selection of the type of misshapen man heads depicted on Roman cameos and on some other luxury products that will be analyzed in greater detail later. I'm currently writing a catalog of, let's say, pathological ornaments, still a work in progress. I have so far collected 15 cameos, 2 intaglios, 3 finger rings with the depictions in a high relief on the basil, and some amuletic pendants for children, crepundia, in amber, bone, and gold, chronologically ranging on the whole from the 1st century BCE to the 3rd century CE. When we come to provenance, we find west to east, Lincoln and Colchester, Trier and Xanten, Aquileia, Tui, Schokland, Cern, Dunaj, Valos, Kostelat, Izmir, and Chersonesus. As usual, portable luxury goods show a wide distribution map as they travel along commercial routes or and with their owners. I called these deformed head freaks, with all due respect, of course, because of their similarity to some characters in the movie Freaks by Todd Browning, released in 1932. Even without any supernatural phenomena, Freaks is indeed the most sensational horror picture of the period. The action takes place in a European touring circus with abnormal individuals performing in the sideshow that is an extra, a secondary production. Both audiences and film critics considered Freaks absolutely intolerable, and Todd Browning's career was ruined. The movie was banned in England for 30 years and in fact remained invisible everywhere until 1962, when it was rediscovered at the Cannes Film Festival. But the analogies between the models for our cameos and the actors playing themselves in Freaks don't end in appearance. In Rome, starting in the late Republic, such unfortunate persons were in great vogue. As Cicero attests, physical defects aroused hilarity. The misshapen were present among the slave or wealthy families and at the imperial court as early as at the time of Augustus. For purchasing dwarfs, Pumili, the crippled, distorted, and the feeble-minded Moriones in Rome, there was a special market, Tonteraton Agora, perhaps a freak show as described by Plutarch. Such persons were very rare and therefore precious. Already in ancient Egypt, during the Old Kingdom, a letter by King Pepi II records 2 small men, dwarfs or pygmies, sent to the court from faraway countries, Actiu and Punt, possibly offered as diplomatic gifts. In Rome, the price of the freaks could be very high, and for this very reason, some of them were cruelly artificially created. Although their physical intellectual deficiencies made them unsuitable for any job. Physical malformation, therefore, appears to be characterized in the Roman context not only by a comic meaning, but also by the connotation of rare and expensive attractions, real status symbols. A camel with the head of a Morio, in short, can be interpreted as a self-representation of its owner as a member of a wealthy elite, much like Venetian blackamoor jewels and their popular derivatives. It was considered very chic in the times of the Serenissima to have a dark-skinned service people. Here, in the Miracle of the Cross, you see a black gondolier de casada nearly centered in the foreground. It is also very likely that glyptic moriones served as apotropaic charms. We can infer this from repeated references to the intrinsic capacity of living moriones to arouse laughter by their strange and rare appearance, diverting the evil eye from its target. Thanks to the thorough investigation of glyptic Bascania by Karina Weiss, we can go a step further. We can apply the term Bascanian, implying a human-like object, to the device carved into a lost sardonyx and preserved by a modern glass caster in Würzburg. Here, a hybrid is depicted, consisting of the body of an ostrich and the hand of a Morio. Precedent for the great success of different types of shrines in Rome must be sought in the richest Hellenistic society, described in great detail in the De Sophiste, and a model still in the mind of Lucian centuries later. Unfortunately, the list of newborns and children with physical malformations or anomalies, a list compiled largely from texts of Titus Livius and Julius Subsequens at the Liber Prodigiorum, cannot give us a historical record of the deformed persons depicted on our cameos, but an epigram by Marshall provides an important source, even if it is unique. It clearly describes a child with the same features as some of the heads on our cameos, caput acutum, auris longe, qui sic moventur, ut solent asellorum. As in Latin, like the as in English, as in the idiom to make an ass of oneself, means both the animal and a person behaving stupidly, looking silly. Moreover, the donkey appears in love spells, both in magical papyruses and in magical gems. It is perhaps not by chance that the monstrous child in Marshall's epigram is the fruit of the adultery between Marula and her deformed slave, Sarah. And let's start with a diagnosis. The cameo from Aquileia is an example of microcephaly, as the comparison with the portrait in profile of Schlitzi points out. Microcephaly involves a head smaller than normal and is one of the symptoms of many genetic or acquired diseases. It had already been noticed among the figurines from Smyrna by Reynaud, who in an article published in 1909 writes, let's mention the microcephalic. Here is a representation of a microcephalic as observed in our asylums. Some authors labeled it an exaggeration, a caricature, but to the Hellenist, the reproductions seems faithful. Two more cameos, both from known find spots, depict individuals affected by microcephaly, in this case possibly one of the symptoms of Sensenbrenner syndrome. Please note on the left cameo the single lock of hair on the top of the bald head and the divergent lines starting from the root of the nose. Another case of microcephalics performing in circuses are the siblings Maximo and Bartola Espina. In this case, the diagnosis could be mandibulofacial dysostosis involving microcephaly, mid-face hypoplasia, ear anomalies, and short stature as well. Three cameos, one of them a unique depiction on face, show an evident dolichocephaly. The two cameos on the left, moreover, show the already seen divergent lines, and the first also the lock of hair on the top of the head. An evocative comparison, which also takes into account the artistic conventions of the period, conceptual and not naturalistic, is the brown quartzite head from the composite statue of a princess from Amarna. The elongated skull suggested to many scholars a pathological explanation or the assumption that the heads of Akhenaten daughters were artificially deformed in early infancy. In fact, the Amarna artists probably overemphasized hereditary traits as stressed by the shape of the head of the so-called younger lady, a mummy who through recent DNA tests has been identified as the mother of Tutankhamun and full sister of King Akhenaten. So we have an interesting case of endogamy. The last cameo show a senile-like appearance. Progeria syndrome is a specific type of this kind of diseases. It involves alopecia, atrophy of subcutaneous fat, skeletal hypoplasia, and dysplasia. Once more, we find the single lock of hair. It is noteworthy how the stage name of Minnie Woolsey, the bird girl, recalls one kind of the misshapen who could be found in the Agoraton Terraton in Rome, the Strozzocephaloi. For the head carved in high relief on the base of an amber finger ring, the possible diagnosis is a Robinov syndrome. Other syndromes present a similar appearance, but differ in many non-facial signs. For the lock of hair, two explanations are possible. The first, some syndromes involve alopecia, progeria, or sparse, slow-growing, fine hair, Sensenbrenner. The second, in the passage by Lucian, the dancing Gelatopoios entered the scene with a shaven head, just a few hairs standing upright on the top of the head. Instead, no comparison has yet been found for the divergent lines in the frontal region. In conclusion, the group of cameos and occasional intaglios depict misshapen male heads and similar luxury amulets or ornaments reproduces the features of individuals affected by various rare syndromes, even though not always fully diagnosable because only the symptom detectable on the head can be examined, for instance, microcephaly. In Roman society, these gems adorning finger rings and pendants had possibly simultaneous meanings on at least two levels. The first, they displayed a self-representation of their owners. Wearing costly jewels of this kind, such people flaunted their possession of expensive freaks. The second, they were powerful apotropaic charms, diverting the evil eye from its primary targets onto their own rare, strange, and laughable subjects. This last slide is a warm tribute to all the adorable freaks represented to you, the cameos and the tiny stars of the movie Freaks, Angelino, affected by hypochondroplasia, the bird girl, Schlitzli, and the Snow Sister. And thank you.
Thank you very much. An absolutely fascinating presentation. We got one remark about a cameo in the Hermitage that is being identified as a mime, and you make this this category at the beginning, that there was a category for actors. How would you fit those together, especially considering your Freaks movie, that is your intertext here, which has been is very interesting comparison. Would those be different categories or could they overlap?
Yes, they are. Can you hear me? Yeah, they are different categories because the actor, the freaks and cameos do not wear masks, but they are performers in such a sense because they were exhibited in private contexts and on shows probably. So not actors in the meaning they wear a mask, but performers surely, as in the movie the actors performs themselves. Clearly our sensitivity is far different from the ancient one, but such circuses showed these misshapen persons until the late 40s of our 20th century.
Yeah, I think there are some Byzantine orations about this phenomenon as well that may be relevant. It's very, very interesting. You have a question from, the other question was from Victoria Chernenko, and you have a question about the dating of the terracottas, if you could just say that briefly, from Radu Ardevan, and then we move on.
So the dating of the terracottas, as I said, is quite difficult because there are, unless in very rare cases, associations with other materials. So they span from the 3rd century BCE to at least the half of the 2nd century CE. Pathological terracottas in themselves are undateable. And the second question was? one about the dating of terracottas, and
yeah,
there was
no,
another one?
That was it. That was it. Then we might have some at the end. Thank you very much again for a fascinating paper.
Thank you.
I need to introduce our next speaker, who is Elizaveta Krasnodubets from the State Historical and Archaeological Museum at Sevastopol in Russia. I think she's there. I think I saw her. Yes, fantastic. And her special topic is the Chersonesus, and she will talk today about business for pleasure, ants and grasshoppers on intaglios from Tauric Chersonesus.
Good morning. Today I want to present to your attention several games from Tauric Chersonesus. Chersonesus is one of the largest ancient centers in the northern Black Sea region. Over a long period of archaeological excavation, a significant number of engraved games have been found here. Most of the stones that have survived up to this day date from the first centuries, when the vexillation of the Roman legions was placed in Chersonesus. There is no doubt that some of the games of this period are connected with the Roman soldiers from the lower Danube provinces. At the same time, other images, even of a completely universal nature, also reflect the significant influence of the glyptics stylistics of the Roman provinces. The cut of the stones and the simplified style of carving find a significant number of the parallels and analogies. For this report, I want to focus on a few images of insects. Until now, only 3 such games have been preserved. All of them were found during the pre-revolutionary excavations of the first head of the museum, Karl Kostyuszka Wolozhinich. 2 items are stored in the State Museum Reserve Tauric Chersonesus in modern Sevastopol. The last one is stored in a Hermitage Museum. The first item is a fragment of a corroded iron ring with a gem depicting an ant. It was unearthed in a crypt number 1764 of the necropolis in Karantina Balka in 1950. Apparently, this burial poor in inventory belonged to a man. Also, in this burial were found a broken lamp and a poorly preserved Chersonesus coin. It dates from the second half of the first, early second centuries. The second is a game with engraved grasshopper among wheat ears. The exact location where the item was found is unknown. According to the cutting method, it can be dated within the first, third centuries. The third game, depicting an ant in a gold finger ring, is kept in the State Hermitage Museum. This ring was found in one of the unique crypts, number 1013, in the Perbolus between the fortress walls, dated to the first, early second centuries. All finds from these crypts are stored in the State Hermitage Museum. A detailed analysis can be found in the article by Grigory below. All 3 games are carved into widespread carnelian in various shades and qualities, and also such subjects find dozens of analogies in museum collection. It is still quite difficult to determine the place of manufacture of these particular stones. Probably the only method for solving this problem will be gemological analysis. Despite the wide variety of animal and insect species, the ancient Greeks and Romans used a limited set of images of real creatures. Most often, these are bulls, lions, dogs, horses, eagles, dolphins, butterflies, ants, but we never meet squirrels, gulls, or mollusks, which are also often met in everyday life. And this naturally gives rise to confidence that the ancients not only admired the natural beauty of these creatures, but also endowed them with some human qualities, sometimes very biased, partial, and even contradictory. It seems that in these images, which served as personal facsimiles, the proportion of stereotypical cultural association was slightly higher than personal preference. In this regard, I had the idea to compare the image of grasshoppers and ants on games. On the one hand, grasshoppers, along with the other insects, like cicadas that emit crisping sounds reminiscent of singing, all are associated with Apollo, art, and inspiration. However, our case is completely different. A grasshopper is depicted with ears of wheat and if in a field. In fact, at this time, people did not see much difference between grasshoppers, locusts, and phylae, considering them harmful to agriculture. However, in reality, grasshoppers are predominantly omnivorous. Only some species are noted as pests, and the damage from them is not too significant. For example, images of locusts on an ear of wheat appeared in lean years on the coins of Metapont, and in the first centuries, images of grasshoppers along with ears were not unusual in Roman glyptics and are found in scenes with political overtones. These images were not necessarily associated with those who received income from agriculture. Rather, they were universal amulets that ward off misfortune and poverty. As is often the case, the picture has the opposite effect. So are the ants. They benefit only their uphill, and they bring solutions to the human economy, carrying away the sown seeds before the shoots appear. Nevertheless, as a highly organized community of workers, the ants have earned respect and admiration even among the ancient Greeks. The ants' hard work and discretion are reflected in several of Aesop's famous fables. As a symbol of rationality, it was associated with the ideal citizen. The ant is associated with agricultural cults and often accompanied images of Demeter, Ceres. Thus, the images of an ant with a grain or ear of wheat were positive. Also, in fact, they are less useful for agriculture than grasshoppers, which can eat aphids. Also, thieves in the form of an ant seduced every Medusa, thereby laying the foundation for the Myrmidon tribe. In the image of an ant, one can situationally assume any of these aspects. It is obvious that a man who had an iron ring with a large carved stone and a rich woman who owned a thin and graceful gold ring with a small stone had the freedom to interpret the meaning of these images in their own way. As a characteristic of a conscientious and thrifty owner, or as a wish for prosperity, this depiction of an ant and a grasshopper with ears are like a reference to the wisdom of Aesop's fables, reminded us of the balance between pleasure and work. Thank you for attention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. A completely different motif. We've had one remark in the chat that from Radu Ardivan, who points out that there was a fable of the ant and the grasshopper. So maybe you can also contemplate a kind of literary impact to your depiction. Please turn off your microphone if you're not the speaker.
Yes.
We are running short of time, so we need to push on. But thank you very much, Elisabetta, for a very nice presentation. And our next speaker is Ivan Ladinin from Lomosonov Moscow State University in Russia. This time I got it right. Sorry about the before. And he works mainly on Egypt. And his presentation today is about a clay ceiling at the A.S. Pushkin State Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow. Thank you.
I shall start with my gratitude to the organizers of this event for the possibility to speak, which is really magnificent, as I see from the discussion. And besides, I should remark that this paper would be impossible without my contact with Miss Catherine Lorber from the American Numismatic Society, and the data she provided to me and the discussion of the subject of this presentation were really important and greatly facilitated my research. The Egyptian collection of the Pushkin Museum of Fine Arts in Moscow preserves a clay imprint of a sill showing a Hellenistic ruler. The object is rather small and of a good quality. It has a cleavage in its upper part and an oblong fracture in its lower part, though this doesn't spoil the image at all. The head of the ruler is shown half-face from the right side. He has large, wide-opened eyes with well-shown lids, upper lid somewhat wider than the lower. His nose is prominent, but not too big, and it is very slightly incurved in the middle. The nostrils are not fat. The mouth is small, the lips are neither flat nor plump. The form of the chin is visible not so neatly, but it seems round. There is probably a dimple in it, but not too deep to make the lower part of the chin to stand out. There is a stubble running from cheeks to chin, obviously not a well-formed beard or a mature man, but exactly a short stubble of the youth. The form of the ears is oval and quite ordinary. They are not big, but one can probably say they are put rather high. The hair is not curly but wavy. It is shown in disheveled short locks, and a rather wide and smooth diadem runs over it. Its neat ties falling behind the nape and hair locks rising just in front of it. The appearance of the ruler seems youthful, but certainly not childish. The style is Hellenic, without features of Egyptian influence, and the diadem indicates definitely that the person portrayed is of the royal rank, and of course must be one of the Ptolemies. The object has never been published, and no iconographical identification of the ruler so far has been proposed. Unfortunately, the provenance of the object is unknown, as well as the precise circumstances of its discovery and acquisition. It belonged originally to Oleg Kovtunovich, a Soviet diplomatic officer and an Orientalist who worked in Egypt in 50s and in 1970s and gathered a collection of its antiquities. In 1984, the Pushkin Museum purchased 20 objects of his collection, including the one discussed. A great part of it comes from the Fayum. However, a natural context for this object is a variety of sill imprints known as the Edfu hoard. Its two larger parts, purchased from an Egyptian dealer still in the early 12th century, are now preserved in the Royal Ontario Museum, Toronto, nearly 400 objects, at the Allard Pearson Museum at Amsterdam, about 300 objects. Considerably smaller number of objects are dispersed in various museums in Europe and America. which allows evaluating the total amount of objects in the hoard as nearly 800. There is, however, no certainty that all of them were discovered by the single dealer at the start of the 20th century, and certainly clay ceilings impressed by signet rings with images of Ptolemaic kings were in use not only at Edfu. Thus, deplorably, one cannot connect the origin of the imprint that belonged to Kaftanovich either with Edfu or with the Fayum, though neither possibility is excluded. Probably Kaftanovich acquired the object in 1970s when he was in a position of some prominence and possessed necessary means for collecting. This was hardly possible in 1950s when he was a beginner on his first mission in Egypt. The good preservation of this imprint tells us that it probably was attached to a document that prevented its breaking, and the imprint was probably made with a signet ring worn by an official as a token of his service to the king portrait. The major task in the research of the object is certainly identifying the Ptolemaic king it portrays. Here, a clear methodology was proposed quite long ago, by Helmut Kyrieleis. Coinage bearing the king's names is the basis to identify the facial features, and the reservation for the variability does not seriously affect the efficiency of such approach. Most conclusions concerning the Ptolemaic statuary have already been formulated by Kyrieleis, though some refinement, not always necessary, were added later by Peter Stenwick, Sally Ann Ashton, and other scholars. A vast research of the Ptolemaic coinage was carried out by Catherine Lorber and a number of her collaborators, and its expansion is her work carried out within a comprehensive study of the Edfu hoard. This work presents a classification of the male royal portraits on the imprints from Edfu, which can be attributed to Ptolemies the VI to the XII, and it effectively provides a necessary context for the attribution of the Moscow object. Here, I should especially thank Ms. Lorber for providing the manuscript of her paper before it was published. Sorry, I'm just checking the chat. It seems that the best analogies to the artifact in question are a number of seal imprints attributed by Catherine Lorber to Ptolemy VIII, Vergetus II, who caroled with his siblings. Who caroled with his siblings Ptolemy VI, Philometor, and Cleopatra II in 170-164. Then came 2 years of his sole rule, and after some interval, his carol with Cleopatra II and III. The metrics to establish his facial features is provided by the silver didrachms minted in the early 330s, when the king was in his early or mid-40s. Lorber defined such common points of these coins as wavy locks framing the temple with fluffy banks above the forehead and 2 small locks riding just in front of the diadem, a small mouth with soft lips, slightly receding chin with sagging flesh below, and says that the portrait ceilings of Ptolemy VIII share with his coins the wavy hair framing the face, the enormous eye beneath a rising brow, and the slightly aquiline nose with flaring nostril. At the same time, the treatment of eyes of the ceilings is different. The eyebrow rises in a smooth arc toward the middle of the forehead, imparting an impression of innocence. The globular eye fills the whole of the socket, and the flesh below is recessed, so that the king appears slightly exophthalmic. According to Lorber, this is the key marker to identify the king on the ceilings as Ptolemy VIII. The analogies to the Moscow ceiling are the artifacts in the Royal Ontario Museum. Perhaps the best fitting one is number 89. Which, like the Moscow ceiling, seems to show Ptolemy VIII considerably young or youngish without obvious signs of maturity or obesity. The hair on this ceiling is not so fluffy as on the Moscow object, but this might as well be a matter of the impression's clarity and preservation. The diadem of the king is also wide and smooth, and facial features seems to coincide. An important thing is that the nostril on this imprint is not so flaring as on the other specimens from Edfu. The quality of the imprint would not allow us to say definitely if it shows a bird. Probably it does, and this is also a short stubble, like on the Moscow imprint. Again, this might be a matter of imprint's quality, but the one from Moscow seems to accentuate the youthhood of the king more than the one from Toronto. In fact, a feature of somewhat elder age on the Toronto imprint is the nostril, which is more flaring than a smoother one on the Moscow imprint, though not so flaring as again on the other specimen that I consider. Number 132 shows the hair, the nose, the eyebrows, and the ears of the king much the same as the Moscow imprint. However, the bird is much more developed, and there is also whiskers. The mouth is plumper, and the dimple is deeper, which makes the lower part of the chin rounder. I should question the idea of Catherine Lorber that the other two imprints are made from one seal, though they are certainly quite alike. An important thing is that they show the king's mouth quite small, like the Moscow imprint, though here the king is probably beardless. Other facial features are quite the same as on the Toronto imprints that were discussed. However, only number 89 shows the king in a smooth diadem. The last two ones show the diadem embroidered, and number 132 shows the king in a laureate diadem. All the Toronto imprints are distinct from the Moscow imprint in showing the facial features of the king more developed and accentuated. The eyes and their lids are wider, the nose is more flaring, the flesh under eyes is recessing, and one can say that some degree of obesity, though mollified, is felt in the images. Number 89, which was discussed the first, is closer to the Moscow imprint than the others, but even here the distinction seems to be felt. At the same time, the clarity of impression on the Moscow imprint is good, and smoother facial features on it do not result from its effacement. Probably one has to conclude that the Moscow artifact shows the same king as the Toronto imprints, but really considerably younger or youngish, and a conventionality in his individual features and the lack of accent in them contributes to that. Here, an analogy from the Ptolemaic sculpture might be called for. There is a life-size sculpture head at the Louvre, which was assigned by Kyrielais to Ptolemy the 9 or the 10, as he thought the white diadem is unlikely for Ptolemy the 8. However, the Edfu hoard shows this is a possibility for this ruler as well. This portrait was attributed to Ptolemy the 8 by Stanwyck, and Miss Lorber agreed with this attribution in our discussion. There is a similarity in the treatment of hair and the modeling of the eyebrow of the statue with the images of the king on coins and clay ceilings. The sculpture head shows a mess of hair locks over the forehead and in front of the diadem. The diadem is again wide and smooth, like on the Moscow imprint and on number 89 from Toronto, and the form of eyes, mouth, and chin are very much alike. However, even more significant is the treatment of the facial features with regard to the age of the person portrayed. The ruler is obviously not a youngster, and the obesity is notable in the front of the face. However, when the head is looked from the side, it is virtually lost. A remarkable thing is beard, which is shown in similarity to the Moscow imprint and perhaps to Toronto number 89 as a short youthful stubble. I will not touch a question if this sculpture head is a Jubilee image, as Stanwyck thought, as it obviously wants more discussion than I am ready to give now. Nevertheless, one thing is obvious. The sculptor might have wanted to retain in the image of the king in his middle age as much youthful features as it was possible without a blatant contrast to reality. The attribution of the Moscow imprint to Ptolemy VIII was an option considered by Miss Lorber when we discussed the artifact. However, she also thought about an alternative attribution to Ptolemy XII, who was also shown youthful and bearded on the majority of his seals. I shall doubt this possibility, as the drachm of Ptolemy XII shows a different form of his nose. It is more crooked, and its rather long tip is turned down. Obviously, one does not notice anything of the kind on the Moscow artifact, and its attribution to Ptolemy VIII seems to be the only possibility. The last, but not the least thing to be discussed about the Moscow imprint is the message of the king's youthful features that it shows. It is tempting to assign it to his first and very short sole rule, an interval in the actual rule of his elder brother Ptolemy VI in 1946, in 164, 163 BC. But certainly no positive proof to this can be given. However, the features of sculpture head from Louvre, which without doubt belongs to his second rule after 145 BC, show that the motive of the king's youthfulness remained topical at that time. Thus, the Moscow imprint might be also dated to the start of the second reign of Ptolemy VIII, when the strength and the alleged youth of the new king had probably to be propagated. While the specimens from Toronto that were discussed, still retaining something from this motive, might represent the age of the king more truly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ivan. We have no question in the chat, and my question was really about the beard, but you eventually got to that. It's so difficult to distinguish Ptolemies from any point of view. So it is fascinating that you can find such details in their features that that can actually perhaps tell us which is which.
Well, I shall say that the article by Ms. Lorber, which I used, is finished with the phrase, "The bird of the Ptolemies is enigma to be studied yet." So I think this point, I shall not comment, so to say, to its meaning. Well, I shall just say that this is the attribute of youthfulness, perhaps the nature, so to say, of this bird, that this is stubble. It emphasizes the youth of the king, but it was important as a diagnostic feature to compare it with the Louvre statue, but I suppose I don't see any special meaning in this that I would like to comment.
Thank you very much, and we can come back to this. It goes very well with our paper by Elisabetta Gagetti, how these features can be used in various ways. Thank you very much. We can move on to our next speaker, who is Angeliki Liveri. She's from Athens. She's probably in Athens, but she also worked in Vienna. And her specialty is ancient Greek music and dance, I think from an anthropological perspective as well. And she's presenting on representations and interpretations of musical and dance motifs on Roman engraved gems.
Here you can see the contents of my presentation, a short introduction. The Roman emperors and the Roman elite adapted the ancient Greek and Hellenistic custom using luxury engraved gems as jewelry, usually ring seals or gifts. They were either private objects or official political medium used for propaganda. These artifacts were created by famous Greek gem engravers, probably also in the imperial workshops. Sometimes they signed their works, as did, for instance, Dioscurides, his son Hylos, Solon, Scylax, and Sostratos, and subsequently they taught Roman artists as well. They also included in their iconographical repertoire musical themes from the Greek mythology and religion, such as Apollo Kytharodus, Muses, the heroes Heracles and Achilles as musicians, Centaurs, Tritons, Satyrs, and Maenads, to decorate small precious or semi-precious stones. The counters were influenced by various monumental artworks or also coins and medals. I selected for my presentation a few gems in intaglions and cameos with musical representations. They can be divided into three categories: objects related to Apollo's iconography, Dionysian themes, and musical motifs with tritons, due to the limited time. Apollo was among the most popular gods who became the patron of Octavian Augustus, because the emperor believed that the god secured his victory against Cleopatra and Mark Antony in the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. He dedicated on 9 October 28 BC the temple of Apollo Palatinus on the Palatine Hill in Rome, which was directly connected to his private house via frescoed halls and corridors. It was the earliest in a long series of impressive monuments. The cult statue represented Apollo Kytharodus. We can see here a copy of the Apollo Barberini marble statue in Munich. Therefore, except of numerous Augustus images, the god patron was also engraved on intaglios and cameos. The most famous renowned artists were employed at the imperial workshops. We can see some iconographical variations of the Apollo motif. Apollo's hand or bust, represented in profile without a musical instrument, is depicted on the fragmentary engraved amethyst intaglio in the San Getty Museum. It is attributed to Solon. The face of Apollo is carved in full profile into the stone surface, his long wavy hair held by a handband. Apollo's features are idealized, as was typical in early Roman Empire art. This gem closely resembles other images of Apollo, but the artist might also have sought to evoke Augustus. Apollo's hairstyle is similar to that of Augustus in many statues and portraits. Solon carved other images of Augustus and members of the imperial family in the guise of deities, and this gem may provide a further example. The next example shows the portrait bust of Apollo turned in profile to the left with a part of his kithara on the background, engraved on an orange carnelian stone of the Augustan and Julio-Claudian period. It is executed in full left profile, reached a high level of wonderfully expressive features, beauty, and harmony. The artist's name is unknown. Perhaps the gem was found in the house of Menander in Pompeii, now in Naples. Variations of the single-standing Apollo Kytharodus typus based on Hellenistic originals are also used by gems engravers in the Roman period. This Apollo figure was very popular and spread, visible also in a variety of artworks, as for instance, the cult statue in the Temple of Apollo Palatinus in Rome, which we have already seen, the marble statue of Apollo Kytharodus from the house of the Kythara player in Pompeii, and numerous other statues and reliefs and on wall paintings, for instance, in Pompeii, Moregina, and Herculaneum. The famous Hellenistic engraver and Dioscurides, the official gem engraver of Augustus, has decorated an orange-brown carnelian intaglio with a musical contest between Apollo and the satyr Marsyas. Dioscurides added to the scene Olympus, a pupil of Marsyas and later also famous musician, Aulos Player. This seal was probably created in the imperial workshop around 30 BC till 20 AD. Its adventure is colorful from its creation to its inclusion to the collection of Lorenzo il Magnifico dei Medici in Florence, now displayed in the National Archaeological Museum of Naples. However, due to the limited time, I will mention here only some information, mainly related to the antiquity. The scene took place at Mount Molus in Phrygia after the musical contest. On the right here, after a photo from De Caro, because it's clear, it's more clear, stands a half-nude Apollo holding his large kithara with his left hand and the plectrum with the right. His torso is turned to the right, whereas his hand to the left, where Marsyas sits nude on a panther skin laid on a rock with his hands bound behind his back. Perhaps they are tied to the tree from which hangs the Sibini, the Aulos case for Diaulos, which are visible to the left. He is turning hopeful to his nearly pupil Olympus, who pleads Apollo to spare Marsyas' life. Based on the references of Pliny and Ovid, we could suppose that the engraver was influenced by a 4th century BC wall painting by Zeuxis, which decorated the Temple of Concord in the Roman Forum. Versions of the subject appear also on Pompeian wall paintings. The figures of Apollo and Marsyas are influenced by plastic works, statues, and reliefs. Some scholars associated the meaning of the musical contest between Apollo and Marsyas, which ended with a god's victory on this intaglio, with a political allegory related to the Battle of Actium. Apollo Augustus is the victor against Mark Antony, who is identified with the barbarian Marsyas and the Dionysian elements. Additionally, the kithara, a symbol for harmony and culture, ideals which Augustus represents, who imposed the peace in the West, was the winner against the Aulos, an orgiasticon symbol which provokes passions and symbolizes the barbarian Orient. Apollo would therefore represent a successful and cultivated agonist, enjoying his victory over his defeated competitor. Here is an ancient copy gem related to this of Dioscurides in Lyon, published by Hadrian Rambach. Some reproductions in intaglios and cameos from the Renaissance onwards are also known. Numerous artworks used this iconographical motif. String instruments, mainly kithara and lyre, appear also single on gems. However, the problem of their authenticity still remains. It is also interesting that Dioscurides' signature is placed on this light blue chalcedony intaglio in Athens in a numismatic museum, representing Marsyas teaching Olympus to play the flute. However, I am not sure about the authenticity of this intaglio. I must examine this in the next time. Unfortunately, the museum is closed this period. If a colleague can give me any information, I am grateful. And here, the same motive in the Greek antiquity left a detail from a reconstruction of Polygnotos Nekia, according to the description of Pausanias, and write a detail from an Apulian vase. And the Dionysian musical or dancing themes are also depicted on Roman gems. They either represent a single member of a theisos, a satyr, Silenus, or a Menad, holding or playing a musical instrument, or performing an ecstatic dance, or pairs or more figures together. The next three examples show dancing Menads. The left and middle illustration are Chalcedon Agate cameos from the collection of Barbos gems in Naples attributed to Sostratos. A characteristic of the works of Sostratos and his workshop is the preference for Dionysian scenes and the portrayal of figures in complex poses. Sostratos was a Greek gem engraver active at the court of Cleopatra at Mark Antony in Alexandria of Egypt, since the pair was known to stage Dionysian performances, both in public and at court. The third is a glass-cast unsigned cameo medallion in New York from the early imperial period. All Menads are represented in a white low relief, performing different steps and holding their mantles or waving shawls behind them. In the second and third picture, the women throw back their hand during their ecstatic dance. However, the Naples cameos are of higher quality related to the iconography and the style, showing a more elaborated figure treatment than that on the New York dancer. Numerous representations of dancing Menads appear in the ancient Greek and Roman art. That shows the popularity of the motif. On a Hellenistic or imperial or early imperial sardonyx cameo in New York is illustrated a Bacchic group consisted of a satyr, two Menads, and a small panther. It seems that they relax after they dance with drums and cymbals. In the center is a half inclined Menad with her bare back to the spectator. She leans her hand on her hands, looking at the satyr in front of her, who plays with a panther style. Her position is very sexy. She has left her cymbals and drum on the ground, flanking an inverted crater, a vase associated with Dionysus and wine. To the right, another half-nude Menad is seated, resting her drum on her left thigh, whereas with her right hand tries to hold her mantle that flutters over her head. This Bacchic scene reminds us resting Menads on reliefs and wall paintings, for instance, in Pompeian houses and also in ancient Greek vase paintings or in Apulian, etc. However, in another style and iconography. The next examples derive from the sea world. Left, a Chalcedon intaglio at Vienna Kunsthistorisches Museum is decorated with a triton in profile to the right in the sea. He blows in a conch shell, holding it with both hands. Right, a Carnelian intaglio in Hanover Kästner Museum represents another male naked and bearded triton who holds two flutes with his left hand while he raises the right. This fun and playful motif of a triton, usually blowing a short or longer conch shell, decorated also various Roman artworks, such as reliefs or wall paintings. Finally, before the Tritons drawn the Augustus chariot on the famous Sardonyx cameo in Vienna in a wonderful composition. The sea victor in toga stands on the chariot holding a branch in his right hand and a scepter in his left. Only the second Triton from the left holds in her right hand his conch shell, raising the other, whereas the other Tritons hold other objects, a rudder, a dolphin, and the imperial power symbols, Victoria with oak breath and the Clipeus Virtutis with Capricorns and globe. This cameo is a masterpiece of glyptic art commemorating Augustus' victory and power. In conclusion, we can make the following remarks. We have seen a variety of musical themes on Roman engraved gems. Some of these small objects are masterpieces characterized by a high artistic quality and elaborated motifs treatment. Their iconography is usually influenced by Greek original artworks in sculpture or paintings. However, the glyptic iconography is also enriched, adapting to the time's trends. Their creators were mainly famous Greek artists who were active in court workshops. Sometimes they signed their works. They used a variety of materials, precious or semi-precious stones, as amethyst, chalcedony, agate, carnelian, sardonyx, and glass past. A great problem for the researcher is to identify whether the intaglio or the cameo is original or an imitation, either from antiquity or from the Renaissance onwards. Some of the musical motifs commissioned by the Roman emperors were used for personal pleasure, but they served the political propaganda as well, as for instance, the luxury gems with Apollo's images, the god patron made for Augustus and others. Therefore, the meaning of some motifs could be interpreted in a new spirit, in a new symbolism. Finally, these amazing objects of the minor art, often of value and extraordinary workmanship, appreciated for their beauty and rarity, verified both the skills of their engravers and the wealth and power of their owner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Angeliki. We have had some comments in the chat about one of the objects that you showed, and I think Claudia Wagner can just take the word, and maybe Elisabetta can share her screen to show us the object, if that's...
Yes.
Hello.
Hello. So sorry, Angeliki. Your Matthias teaching Olympias is a neoclassical gem. It's a Poniatowski.
Yeah.
Put in the chat.
I imagine it, but thank you very much. I called to the museum 2 days ago, but they cannot say something to me. It's neoclassical.
We wish that it was, classical, because it is so wonderful. But yes, I have it in my sets. I've sent you the link.
Thank you.
Martin is actually the one who wants to talk to Elisabetta about the mask. Yes. So shall we do that now while we're on screen? Yeah. And thank you, Elisabetta.
I can share because I can you see my screen?
Oh yes, you've got that there. I think the interesting thing is that he is actually an actor because he's got this false phallus. His nose is also phallic, so I quite take it that he is he's got medical deformities, but he's also an actor, and of course it was found at a site. We don't have very many theatres in Roman Britain, but he was found at Barnsley le Bec, and just across the river Humber, there is the small town of Petuaria, rough on Humber, where we actually have an inscription naming the fact that there was a theatre there. So almost certainly he was somebody who was performing at this little local theatre in quite a small town.
I think you are right, and your in authoritative interpretation of this cameo as a mime actor is to be shared. And because first of all, he doesn't wear a mask, and we do know that mime was the only Roman theatrical genre performed with no mask, and the difference is clear. And in your picture, in your black and white picture, the nose is very clearly visible. Actually, it looks a little phallic, and I remembered this epigram by Marshall: so large is your cock, papillus, and so long your nose that you can sniff it whenever you erect. I think it is the perfect caption for the cameo. So he is a mime actor, and but possibly my freaks are really pathological individuals. So we are working on hand in hand on two similar paths. Thank you, Martin.
Do you think there could have been masks inspired by the deformities, so that, you know, on the gems you have it almost twice removed, that it was a caricature too which was inspired, and that
no, because I don't think they are caricatures, because I and Professor Chimello compared the cameos with carrying a series of pictures from medical articles, and the symptoms, at least those we can detect from just the head, are quite sure. So
yes.
The interesting is the meaning of this cameo. Why did they choose to have a freak on the cameo, or on a gem, or on a pendant, or about the crepundia for the family children? But they are definitely pathological individuals. Thank you, Claudia.
Right, thank you so much.
Somebody else had put something about a mime from in the chat, but I can't remember who it was. Do they want to speak up, or? No, we can't find that. It's Anna. Anna, sorry, Anna Hamat was yeah, please. Anna, can you speak?
Hello to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So for Angelique, because it was the last one, I just want to add something. Iconic instruments appear on their own on the gems, and I think now to the Saint Augustine.
I cannot hear. I cannot.
His advice. Can you hear me?
No, very well, unfortunately. Perhaps you can write in the chat. Yeah, we can't hear you very well. Sorry, Anna. Please write in the chat again. Yeah, we can take the next question in the meantime, which was from Torben Schreiber for Ivan.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, here I am.
Thank you. Ah, hello, there you are. Hi. Well, thank you very much for your presentation. I was just, I mean, we don't have the time now to solve the problem with the Ptolemies, but I was just wondering whether you are aware of the book published by Helmut Kyrieleis in 2015. because he made this big catalog about the Paphos seals.
Okay.
And I'm only mentioning it because I have the feeling that we mainly focus on the Ptolemies that we know also from coins, but we also have this, I mean, like Ptolemy the 9th, the 10th, the 11th, because we don't have the coins and we are not able to identify them. Yeah, exactly. Thank you,
Okay.
Matthias.
It's
and he had
that I know this book. Unfortunately, I don't have it at hand. I think you understand, but I don't think that my argumentation suffers from this because the object is clearly from Egypt.
Yeah.
And, the natural context for it should also be probably looked for at Egypt. As for the identification of portraits, whatever presents them, coins, ceilings, or statues, we can be sure that the matrix for identification is coins, because they bear names. How else would we know the identities of the kings if we deal with images uninscribed? So I suppose that coins as a matrix, which was used by Kyrielides and very few things, has been refuted ever since. And comparing them with what seems to be really the natural and the likely context of this object is the method which is sufficient.
Absolutely, but I just wanted to mention that because we also have these anonymous kings. So, and we don't have their names, and we have like, I don't know, 800 seal impressions from Nea Paphos, from Ptolemy VIII up to the last Ptolemy. And I guess, so if you have like 140 seals of Ptolemy VIII, this would also benefits your argumentation. So that's why I'm just, and the clustering is
well, you
also
see,
very important.
I have the privilege to see the images of the Etfuchot, which we will all see when this wonderful article is published.
Yeah, I guess
I suppose that, well, more comparison is better, certainly.
Yeah,
I suppose that what I have at hand is now sufficient, especially when we see really these affinities with the Toronto images and with the Louvre statue.
Yeah, I guess it will be published in August, I guess, the Hellenistic Sealings and Archives.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. We have a clarification from Anna that she meant to refer to St. Augustine, who advises Christians to recognize themselves through the seal on their ring, which should also be a lyre. I'm not sure there's a precise reference, but I guess this is for Angeliki. I don't know.
Yes, I should be able to hear you.
Yeah.
Do you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So I wonder if Angeliki knows about Saint Augustine, who advised Christians to put on the finger a ring with a special seal, and among others, on this ring, on the stone of the ring, should be a musical instrument. So of sure we cannot apply every time what Saint Augustine says, but I think it should be known and counted in the matter of Angeliki musical instruments.
I have not.
Yeah. Maybe you could tell.
Excuse me,
Angeliki.
I have not heard good. I have not.
Yeah. Maybe.
Can you repeat, please?
Maybe she can get in touch with you later.
Yes, of course,
Of course.
Yes,
Thank you, because I cannot. The connection is
You're welcome.
Not good.
Thank you.
And
so I would like
to Claudia Wagner for the info.
I would like to thank all the speakers for a very rich session, and also everybody else who contributed. There's lots of information still in the chat that people can access.